We're going to talk about the 3 things you should avoid while looking and purchasing land. These are very expensive mistakes that if you make them, they're not easy to get out of, and it's time consuming and can be very costly. And they're also just very frustrating mistakes to make, and after you make them, you're just like, ugh, like I should have prepared beforehand and checked into this. So these are 3 mistakes that can save you time, money, and frustration. Number 1 is, you want to be polite and trusting, but you don't want to trust 100% in what the ad or the real estate agent tells you. So whatever they say, great, you got to start somewhere so you can, kind of whittle your property decisions down. And then you always want to confirm. You have to look the stuff up yourself because people make mistakes. Some people are unscrupulous and will not tell you the truth just to make a sale. And there's all different kinds of people out there. And the same with an ad. They could just either not know the answers and just assume, or there's just a lot of different things that can happen. So you don't want to believe anybody or anything. You want to see it for yourself and look it up yourself. And you are completely able to do that. That's the thing. The information is right there. You just have to put the effort in to look it up yourself. I'm going to name a few of the things that you should be looking for when you go to the county or go online and you're looking up important things that make a difference. Of course, zoning. You have to realize what you want to do in your homestead, and you can't do that just anywhere. Like any piece of property in any neighborhood won't let you homestead and have animals and different things. So not only are there animal restrictions in some area, other areas will have land limits like an acre per horse or cow or stuff like that. Every place is different, so you have to look that up. In zoning as well, you can see if it's in a flood zone, if that pertains to your area. A lot of times you'll see a piece of land and it'll look completely high and dry and you'll be like, I don't see any signs of floods or flooding. And nevertheless, they have everything on record when the last time it flooded and whatever. And there's this thing called a 100-year flood zone. And that's how they go by. That's what they go by. So personally, I would not buy a piece of property in a flood zone or a 100-year flood zone. You can build in a 100-year flood zone, if I'm not mistaken. You might be required to do a special septic to make sure that, it doesn't leach if there's a flood or whatever. So there's, different requirements. But I personally work so hard and it costs money and time and effort. I would hate for anything to come along and flood it. You would just, that would just be a bummer to me. You have to fix it all and rebuild, and I just don't want to do that. So that's a biggie for me. Also, some properties will have a right-of-way through the piece of property. So it might be 10 acres, but there is a right-of-way. It could be along the edge of it. They try to make it along the edge of it, but it could kind of be more towards the middle of it or whatever. So you're thinking, looking at the piece of property, like, oh, look at this big rectangle, 10 acres is ours, 5 acres, we can build wherever we want. And then you realize, oh wait, there's a right of way through, 3/4 of it. So that can definitely mess up your plans when you're trying to lay out a homestead. So that's another biggie in my opinion. Alrighty, so the next thing is a deed. You want to make sure that if the property is deed restricted, that you get a copy of that deed and you read it. So sometimes it's a long piece of paper, it's quite a few pieces of paper, all the restrictions in the deed. And that means that neighborhood is deed restricted with the county. Like they have little rules that you have to follow if you live in that neighborhood. That can be as picky as you can't leave your garage door open and how long your grass has to be. And just a variety of things. How many animals you're allowed to have, no roosters, or just whatever they want to write in there, basically, they're allowed to. So that's the developer does that when they're developing the little housing neighborhood or whatever. And surprisingly, it can be out in the country, it can be deed restricted. So always check that and then get a copy of that deed and read that so you know what those restrictions are. And if you read those and you're like, forget it, I don't want to do all that, then you just like pass on that piece of property. Number 2, it's a huge mistake to get a variable rate loan. Once you find your property, and of course the best way to pay for it would be cash, or even owner financing is awesome if you can find that because you don't have to deal with a bank. But if you're one of those people and you just have to deal with the bank, you have no choice. Make sure you don't get a variable rate loan. And the reason that is, of course, it sounds awesome when you first get it. It'll be lower than a fixed rate loan, and that's how they try to hook you in. So that'll sound good, but here's the problem with a variable rate loan. It can go up. They'll say it can go up and down, but it's probably not going to go down. And that's a very hard way to live with, the length of a loan. It could work out fine in the beginning. It might start off with a very low rate, but the problem is you don't know what it's going to be in 5 years. And that is a very stressful way to live and budget, most importantly. A lot of people are on a tight budget, and to run a homestead, you have to be on a tight budget. You got a lot going on, which is, of course, exciting and awesome. But still, you have to have a budget. And for your mortgage to just like, boom, change, and now it went up, and who knows, in 6 months it could go up again, or a year, you know what I mean? It has this different terms, but it can go up. And then that's just, you could lose your job or not be well, and then your mortgage goes up at the same time. It could be a big crisis. So you don't have to get a variable rate loan. It's a choice. You can get a fixed rate or a variable rate. So it's just easy, and I think a smart move to get the fixed rate loan. Number 3 is it's a huge mistake to buy your homestead too far out of town. You want to be out in the peace and quiet and enjoy nature, and it's very enjoyable to do all that. It's just lovely. But the problem is, if you're too far out, it becomes a hardship. That's what happens. Because every little thing, let's just say you're doing a building project, you know what I mean? And of course, on a homestead, you're going to be doing a lot of projects. And that's the fun of it and the thrill of it, in my opinion. But nevertheless, you have to get your supplies. And when you are driving to town, like, oh, I forgot this. That's how I build. I always forget something. And it's just like, or I like halfway through, I'll be like, oh, I need that part too, or whatever, you know what I mean? And if you're too far out of town, it's like a journey to get to town to get your supplies. I like to be outside of town. And like I said, you can see around here, it's very nice. It's very country. I can enjoy nature and the peace and quiet. It's just lovely. But yet, I'm personally like 25 to 30 miles outside of town, a big town. So that works perfect for me. It's still quite a drive, but it's not a journey, so to speak. Also, you don't want this long, bumpy dirt road where you're just bumping around as you're driving down your driveway, and then it gets washed out in the rain. And it's not like you have a hole to fix for your driveway. You got to go out there, and it's just this huge job to maintain. Driveways are a big deal. To me, a driveway can make or break a piece of property I'm considering. That's how big of a deal a driveway is to me. It can make or break it. If it's too steep, too long, too washed out, ruddy, that's a deal breaker for me. Also, if you're too far out of town, it can be pricey to put in electric if your property doesn't have electric already. Like if you get a good deal on just a bare piece of land. Surprisingly, electric can be quite pricey to put in, and you have to, calculate that into your expenses. And you can call and see how much that is. If you just love this piece of property and you have to have it that's way out there, I suggest you call the electric company and see what the cost would be to run electric out there. A lot of times it'll just be so pricey, you'll have to just look for a different piece of land. Like that just won't work in your budget. And then also, a lot of times you're just not going to get an internet service. You might be able to do satellite, but that's not quite as good. So, or phone line, which that's not quite as good either. If you want to learn a little bit more about this, you know, a little more advice and just a little more in detail, I wrote this little ebook that can really help people that are in that stage of their life. They're looking for a piece of property, and you can check that out. The link is in the description below.